It's nothing. What's going on? That's my blood. That's my blood. It's a lot of my blood.
Okay, in this video I want to talk about how I will review video games. This was originally meant for my website, which I'm still developing, but having many, let's say, complications or delays because of school and work. One of the guidelines that I will follow is that there will be no zoom-ins. So when doing like a comparison video of anything, of video games, I will not zoom in to see pixel differences, because the whole point of seeing the difference of something is through the human eye, not what the computer sees. So if you have to zoom in to see a difference, then there's no point of pointing that out, because the human eye will most likely not pick that up. Guideline rule number 2, no version comparisons, because this is ultimately looking at the human error and not whether one platform is better than the other, because what developers will try to do is meet at the highest common denominator. With that in mind, if per se one version is slightly different than the other, it doesn't necessarily mean the hardware is inferior. It just means that coding doesn't replicate the same results as another. So in the end, what I'm trying to get at is that if a particular version is different from another version, that's mostly due to coding or how hardware produces or renders graphics or the game itself, and not so much whether the hardware is superior. So keep that in mind when it comes to version comparisons. We're not going to do that because it's just pointless overall. Guideline rule number 3, comparing only hardware in their categories except for computer hardware. And the reason for this is because even though computer hardware is programmable and not the other hardware categories like console and portable gaming, the reason why computer is a nut from this rule is because computer games have different experiences. So essentially, a computer game can replicate something that's on console or on portable gaming. So that's the main reason. And another reason is because the console and portable gaming have limitations. They can't do exactly what the computer games can do. Like say, for example, StarCraft. It would be hard to replicate that on console gaming with a controller or a gamepad. And it can somewhat be done with portable hardware, but on a different scale, and it's just completely different. So just keep in mind that computer hardware varies when it comes to gaming experiences, and the console and portable gaming is limited in what they can do. Lastly, guideline rule number 4, comparing multi-platform software only with one platform of choice for that segment or video, unless it's exclusive versus exclusive. So this is like basically self-explanatory, but when you're comparing like two different games, I want it to be on one platform if possible, so it would be more focused on the games than the hardware differences. Unless it's something that's exclusive and multi-platform, then I'll choose the platform that the game is exclusive on. So still there'll be no hardware differences and just focus on the games themselves, unless there are exclusive versus exclusive. So that's what that entails. So now I'll get into the letter grading. If I ever do review games or ever get a chance to, it will be a letter grade. And the first letter grade will be work in progress, or short form WP. With a work in progress, grading is disapproving the quality formally, strongly, and abstaining that the game is a work in progress. This is when the game quality is below industry standards to a point that the game is unplayable for anyone due to coding or programming or design. This can entail, but not limited to, dead ends, invincible algorithms, to anomalies that prevent any kind of player progression. Common attributes affecting results: invincible systemic algorithms, dead ends requiring to reboot the software, and unavoidable systemic anomalies preventing any kind of player progression. The next letter grade is D, so it's like a D minus, D, or D plus. This mainly stands for works, but mainly lacks fixes to easily replicated anomalies. So the game demonstrates elements to have potential, but lacks the execution, technique, and structure. In this grade, the quality of the game is good enough that is playable, with significant problems that interferes with the player to the point that the problems control the quality of the experience with each playthrough. The common attributes affecting results is too much guidance or direct hints that eliminates all the challenges in the game, not making a video game, can affect length. Programming systemic anomalies controlling the experience every time. Unpredictable systemic anomalies preventing any kind of player progression. Letter grade C, so this is C negative or minus or C plus, and this generally stands for works but mainly lacks distinction. The C grades are equivalent to average. The game demonstrates execution but lacks a unique expression of ideals or themes or perspectives, either differing from within or outside the IP's universe to be distinct enough. In simple terms, the game must be playable at this point of level of grading. And the common attributes affecting results is the expression of the game isn't unique enough inside and outside the franchise. Too much guidance or direct hints that eliminates some challenges in the game can affect length. Memorization over skills in a skill-based game. Purpose/incentive to use implemented features. And poor design of checkpoints. Letter grade B, this generally includes grades like B minus, B or B plus, and just B. And this generally stands for works but doesn't surpass standards. So the B grades are equivalent to industry expectations, meaning it has execution, uniqueness, distinction, technique, and structure. The distinctive games try new game mechanics and complement the game. Outstanding graphics, audio at a level of quality expected, with amazing value, and controls worked as advertised. The only element that holds back this game can be length, depth, sometimes no change in, depth in, or creative use of game mechanics. Too traditional, or overall meets the standards to the industry. Common attributes affecting results: meets the quality bar without redefining it, distinctive inside and outside the franchise, not encouraging players to play the game the way it's meant to be played, otherwise weak parameters. Letter grade A, this includes gradings of A minus and A plus. This generally stands for Redefines Quality. The A grades is equivalent to above industry expectations, meaning that the game exceeds industry satisfactory quality levels. These games have everything but at a higher level of quality, as well as structure and sophistication. The hard thing about these games is that they tend to be the least popular, but make the most impact in the gaming community. Common attributes affecting results: highly distinctive, meaning an expression never really explored before, breaking commonly used gaming convention that can become the standard, complexity to the expression of ideas, animations for every process for an avatar if present, with exception to power-ups or anything equivalent, and hard to replicate systemic anomalies. In this last section, I'll go through how to review these video games, so basically the criteria for reviews. I just want to reiterate that this is coming from my website, so I'm just echoing what I would be doing on my website when it comes to reviews. And when the website's up, all this will be all in writing. But since you can't really write on YouTube, I'm basically doing this off the cuff. So keep that in mind. This is for my website, but I'm also doing this so people on YouTube can understand the criteria and how I look at the software and review the games and stuff like that. Also, I want to say that this section is broken up into different types of critics, that overall being every single one when reviewing will be the ideal criteria and following the criteria to a T, basically. But everything's broken up to different types of critics, so it'll be easier to understand and break down. First up, the articulate critic. An articulate critic is to express one's thoughts with precision, clarity, and grace. Simply saying, I hate this or I love this is simply expressing one's opinion. This kind of ties in with the sensitive critic, because being a sensitive critic means that the critic isn't haste with their criticism with specifications of what does not work. In Theater Brief 8th edition, Robert Coyne says, articulation means the careful building of ideas through expression of evidence, logic, argument, and useful analogy and example, and the style of expression neither pedantically turgid nor idiosyncratically anarchic. Basically, criticism should be a pleasant read, not suffocating readers with prejudices and egotistical showing of the critic. This is one of the most crucial parts of being a critic, is that the writer analyzes properly and not create something out of nothing. Example saying, I hate how this gritty game has so much of the same dark colors throughout, will not suffice. This statement is failing to understand the whole setting/feel of a game with an opinion. I will be careful of what I say and will not be redundant that the game is repetitive, because in a simple sense, every game is repetitive. An example of this is a first-person shooter, and all the person does is shoot. They can be seen as repetitive, so articulation is keyed here. In most cases, this will be said because the individual doesn't like the genre. I'm not biased to certain genres or any genre. Analyze by not projecting polemics, advocacy, or passion. Analysts are to be cogent, contextualize, and most of all, analyze, meaning staying within the game to formulate an identity through a breakdown of elements tying to the observant critic. With all that said, also not being pretentious will help greatly when being articulate so the targeted audience can understand. Next up, the demanding critic. This is the critic who holds the developers to the best of their abilities. In other words, don't expect a 20-person crew to create a competitor with a 200-person crew. Not limited to, but how the game is distributed, priced, and platform of choice will be considered when grading. This also means that holding the hardware as well to the best of its abilities. Think realistically. Don't expect the handheld to deliver a 7.1 surround sound available on hardware X. As a journalist, I want to review everything on fair ground without demanding something that isn't possible with certain products or developers. Thinking in reality and not fantasy is keyed here, so being a good demanding critic. This can also be tied in with the observant critic, that a critic doesn't demand something in their vision, as well as being realistic to the developer's resources to create games. An example, a letter grade B on hardware P can be a different level of quality of letter grade B on hardware T. As stated before, don't expect a 20-person crew to deliver a product that is impossible for them to achieve. More features doesn't mean better. The overall goal here is to challenge the creators, not just make things difficult, but stimulating. Next up, empirical critic. There will always be inferences. Yet with experimental criticism or inferences is when the writer looks at the products in theoretical point of view. The reason why I use the word inference, often called an opinion, because not being the creator can lead to misunderstandings of intentional accuracies from inaccuracies, can make mistakes by forgetting evidence. Public reception is unpredictable with products, but still is factual based. There are two elements when being an empirical critic, that they are objective with their personality, and they are knowledgeable or educated in the field of work. In professional opinion, it's just looking at the reviews in my criteria only on concepts that one would not fully know unless having worked with the creators, but produces replicable logic solely from observation. In basic terms, it's the reality of the world without the illusions of the mind through experiment or experience from the facts within context. The idealistic critic. This is the information in the reviews that don't directly affect the final result in the game. The secondary information. For example, a journalist may constantly state a game for not being fun with a final letter grade of B+, for simple reasons. This is because personal, or aka illusionary opinions, can be useful information at the same time it does not determine what a bad game is. This helps us clearly state, or helps me clearly state, my opinion or experiences I had with the particular product without jeopardizing a final letter grade. Like stated before, because one does not find the game fun, it does not determine how bad or good the game is, since personal opinion doesn't determine how good coding or programming is. This also works the other way around. A journalist may find a game fun with a letter grade of D-. This is just everything that is in our criteria, or my criteria, to review a game that can be mentioned, but does not determine the final letter grade. In other words, it's the illusions of the mind that pulls over the reality by a theory of knowledge that comes through thoughts, or thought only, and inside and outside of context. Next up, informed critic. Being an informed critic is more on the professional side of things, for the fact that not every amateur critic will buy or play every single game available. Part of being an informed critic is that they compare one game to another. This includes comparing other games from the same studio to comparing games in the same genre. Another aspect of this is to understand basics of certain genres to universal designs or themes like linear environments, open world environments, recreational environments, starting from scratch, metaphor, horror to science fiction. There are genres that are more prone to having linear designs, while others are more prone to having more open or recreational environment designs. Example, action-adventure games are more prone to having backtracking than action games. This is something to take in consideration, as well as innovation in genres. An example, mixing first-person shooter game mechanics with a role-playing game is also important to understand. There shouldn't be certain bias to genres for their particular design choices at the same time, or understanding innovations in genres as well. It's important to understand that when an element works for a game, other developers will eventually follow. This is bringing up design versus expression. When a game is similar in design, this generally means it belongs in the same genre, while having the same expression is stealing an idea. This can work the other way around too, because one developer raises the bar or standards, it doesn't mean another has to follow in the same genre or a different genre. There are different ways of raising the bar. The most important part of this is that the journalist looks at the standards of the particular genre and careful not comparing other genres or games to other genres, distorting the standards, cross-examining. The last thing to remember is not to reveal solutions to challenges in the game, if possible, or it becomes a walkthrough than a review. This is tying into the genre and the design of the video game, and even though a story isn't needed, many people do play them for stories as well, so avoiding important plot points in a game is a must. The objective critic. This is the most important part of being a good critic, is being objective in the writing, without all those emotions and personal opinions and preferences determining a product's outcome. By being objective, it's not influenced or clouded by personal feelings, interpretations, or prejudices, ultimately making the review unbiased. The reason why I stress this is because it's pretty simple. Opinions or preferences do not equal facts. This means the critic will have to back up their choices with evidence, staying within context of the specific software. By creating a formula to deal with particular situations allows consistency, meaning that the formula would be the objective aspect and the subjective aspect would be the variables in the formula. This just means that we will have a standard, or I will have a standard algorithm like BEDMAS in the order of operations in mathematics to reviews in software, in specific hardware and software classifications. This requires a critical thinker to be able to break down elements within the software to build an argument using factual data that can be explained in detail to clearly back up the choice made and can be seen on both sides of the spectrum. In the end, I want to create a precise and accurate reviews amongst journalists instead of having inaccuracies and no precision. The objective reality or provable concept through measurement. The observant critic. This is essentially having an open mind and is going into the game as if it's a clean slate for the developer. The critic should not have no expectations, knowing that it is a video game and that programs are created by humans, so there will be limitations to what can be achieved. There shouldn't be restricted thinking to adverse to propitious. Reactions should all be held till the end. Don't go into a game with a checklist, but go into a game for what it is, not for what it is not. A major part of being an observant critic is that the critic does not create things out of nothing, so only criticizing what is put into awareness or existence. Otherwise, it will not be critiquing, and it will be more of a checklist of what the critic wants in the game instead of what is in the game. This just means that if there is no multiplayer, you can't critique a multiplayer since it's not in the game, and you can't knock it for not having multiplayer because it's not in the game. So therefore, you're not critiquing the game, you're critiquing what's not in the game. Hence, defeating the purpose of a review has to be critiquing what's in the game. Hence, what's in the game. Remaining focus is forgetting about the past, other critical statements, and the creator's promises or promise, or even your own predictions. It's just the critic, the product, and nothing else. Once the data is collected, limiting if not ridding the observation bias, a person's tendency to perceive information one way because they have certain expectations that create incorrect inferences of the data, this information will be translated in steps. Last but not least, the sensitive critic. Being a sensitive critic or constructive critic is building on one person's work without losing focus that criticism is to help people and not make people feel worthless for trying. Just like the observant critic, there isn't any restricted adverse thinking, but not writing in a way that the criticism is talking down to developers, resulting sometimes into egotistical criticism, destructive criticism. Talk in passive voices to not appear that the comments are not directly attacking the performance and hope to motivate the creators to keep trying. Including certain tone when writing is also helpful because speaking in a passive voice doesn't mean a critic is completely constructive. We call this an abusive tone, or I call it an abusive tone. This is applying to video reviews, comparison videos, voice recordings, or even writing. Preface the comments to help with the choices of words used to lessen the blow of attacks to a creation with a positive euphemism. This means even though a game gets one of the lowest letter grades, I will still give developers positive feedback. There is always something good about a game. Find that positive. Giving specific reasons why a critic made certain decisions without the haste is also another factor. A critic can expect a developer to improve on a game without giving specifics on what to improve, also thinking about the statements beforehand. This will help reviews be a pleasant read or listen in the way it should be by giving that helping hand and not that helping punch. That would be it for the criteria to an extent, because I do believe the critic should know what video game genres are, but that would be saved for another video. The video game genres are also on my website, and also to bring up when reviewing a video game, I can't with my rules point out negatives based on the ESRB ratings. What does this mean? Well, if the ESRB rating states that the game has a lot of blood and gore, intense violence, and strong language, as a critic I can't be complaining or point out how terrible the game is with these elements. The reason why I created this rule is because video games cater to different demographics, and that would be in ways defeating the purpose of the ESRB rating. As an example, to convey my point, would be Mario Kart 8 versus Alien Isolation video games, with their ESRB ratings completely reflecting the targeted audience. Another good example would be Uncharted series versus the rebooted Tomb Raider series. With these two games, the type of content would be different because of the ESRB rating, even though the gameplay is very similar to each other. Going back to the genres, it's also important to not miscategorize video games and compare it to other video games from other genres. The reason for this is that the bar being raised isn't going to be distorted, and the whole point of reviews is to compare video games within the genre. When I believe it's okay to cross-reference is when giving video games awards at the end of the year. I hope you enjoyed the video. TX3 out.
Hey, you made me, you owe me! This fire's only gonna buy 2-3 minutes diversion tops! I gotta get now! Ain't going back to Curtin Cave.
Yeah, well, whoever's coming is coming for you, man, not me.
You've been seen, son. Folks here know about you, and she's got a way of making people talk. Good luck, kid.
Oh, hell no. No way I'm gonna die in a fish guttery.